I'm here with Stephen Crisp. Stephen is head of horticulture for the US Embassy, but also for the US Ambassador's residence. So quite a lot to contend with there. And in addition to all of that, whenever people come to dinner at the company, all the displays are done by Stephen. And so anybody that came to the last Mansion House dinner was just full of all those white orchids in
Seems like a lifetime
frames.
ago now.
I know, doesn't it? But it was fabulous. And so Stephen, today you're going to do some demonstrations for us on tips and techniques and how we might decorate our homes for Christmas. And thank you very much for doing this.
You're welcome, Heather.
Thanks.
Thank you. Good. Well, welcome everybody to this remote workshop, and kindly hosted by Paul Rochford at his nursery. And I wanted to show you today some ideas where I think they're things that are sort of you can aspire to. It's all very well doing grand displays and things like that, and I do some quite grand displays. I'm sure not all of you live in a 32-room mansion, but hopefully some of these ideas will be relevant to your own particular situations, whether it's cottage or castle. And also being sort of resourceful as well, because whether it's time or money, we all have limits to what we are able to do. So I'm trying to do things that are perhaps sustainable as well, and one of the first things I'm going to show you is something where not only can you use the material, but you can reuse it in your own gardens. So it's going to be things for outside and inside, and I'll just not show you every last little detail, but hopefully impart to you some of the tips and tricks that I've learned over the years. I mean, I'm a horticulturalist and landscape designer by training, and came into doing the flowers when I started at the embassy almost 34 years ago. One of the things on the job description was I did do flowers in the residence, and we do a lot of entertaining there usually. And I think that plants, whether they're in an official residence like Winfield House or in your own home, when you do a design, when you make something, it shows people you've made that little bit of extra effort, and it's a gesture of how much love and respect you have for the people that you have into your home. So people do really appreciate it, and of course it gives pleasure to friends and family as well. So one of the first things that I was going to show you this morning was what I'm calling a Christmas box, and it's this here. And the inspiration for it was I actually went to see the lights in the West End last Saturday, thinking that it would be quite quiet as we're still in theory in lockdown, and there was almost as many people out and about on Oxford Street and Regent Street as you might find if the shops were open. But I ended up in Covent Garden. I went down there with my nephew and his partner, and I'd heard that suddenly a light bulb went on. I'd heard about they had a head gardener for the old Covent Garden market, and that he had created these planters out of old fruit crates and things like that, and there was this narrative going on in the different seasons, I guess paid for by the Traders Association, and on blocks and things they had all of these fruit boxes that were planted up with these miniature landscapes that I thought was so clever. And he had a miniature Christmas tree and some evergreens and ivy and some cyclamen and things. And I've actually been exploring this idea that, we do planters in our garden, but, it doesn't have to be about begonias and pansies. It can be about a much broader palette than that. And so I had this sort of idea this week just to do what I'm calling a Christmas box. The box, as it turns out, is an old wine box. I think it says something on the end of it, the wine. I'm not sure, I'm not a wine buff, but anyway. But basically you can use any kind of container. And I've just brought together some plants which have a kind of a wintry or seasonal composition, and group them in such a way that it is a bit like a miniature landscape. The box itself, I've just put some polythene inside it, so that if you planted it up, you could keep it watered. I'd suggest that you puncture the polythene in a few places so that excess water could drain away, and unpot the plants, put them in, put in some compost, dress the top with some moss just to sort of finish it off. And the beauty of something like this is that you could have groups of these. You could have different wooden boxes and crates of different sizes. If you had a front door steps, you could have, it's about sort of scene setting, and it doesn't have to be just one thing that's plopped down. It can be a group of things, which I think makes it much more interesting.
We've got apple boxes. So
exactly.
we could use an apple box.
Apple boxes, fruit boxes. I mean, a lot of fruit, particularly from the continent, still comes in those softwood crates which you could use. But it could equally be flower pots or anything like that, so any vessel that basically will hold some plant material will work. And what I've used in here is Calicarpa, which has this most extraordinary purple berry, which I don't think there's very many, if any, other things that have such a vivid coloured fruit. There's a Dryopteris in here, one of the native ferns, which is one of my favourites because it's more drought tolerant than many others. Leucothea, Fontanacea, Rainbow, I think perhaps this one is, in the foreground here, which is a good evergreen. It gets this blush in the leaf, which has a seasonal appearance. And then Skimmia rubella, which these look like berries. In fact, they're flower buds which will open. They have most beautiful scent in the spring, but it looks like this for the whole of the winter. There's some hellebores on either side, and I have to admit I've slightly cheated and used some silk hellebores to make them look slightly more foliferous. But you know what? There's nothing wrong with using faux botanics, as they call them now. And if they're integrated in with other things, they are remarkably authentic, and of course they have a longer shelf life. There's a cyclamen here, ornamental cabbage, some pine cones on the front there that I've just tucked in, and some pieces of ivy. And as I said, I've just finished the whole thing off with a little bit of moss on the top there. But smaller versions of these could almost be great Christmas presents as well. You could buy 3 or 4 evergreen shrubs with perhaps one flowering plant, and it would be a great thing instead of the boring old bottle of wine or something, to take along and say, here, So I think this sort of miniature landscape, this planter idea is something really worth exploring.
It's really effective, isn't it? And I can definitely see this thing about if you get a variety of different shaped boxes and sizes, and you put those together, it would make such impact, wouldn't it?
It really would. And you could do different ones for different times of year. These evergreen material could be supplemented in the foreground with spring flowering things or other things that are a bit more sort of seasonally interesting in the early part of the year or later on in the year. So I think it's something really worth thinking about more and exploring. And that you don't have to go out and buy an expensive container. It can basically be anything that will hold plant material, albeit for a fairly short period of time. We're not talking about years, but it will certainly last a year or two.
And these pine cones, are they wired?
Yes, the pine cones are wired, and we'll talk a little bit about wiring later on in the demonstration. So these ones have had what I call a florist wire passed around the base of the pine cone. These are the thicker wires you can get from a florist shop. And if I can just grab a cone, I've picked one with a wire on it already, but you basically put the wire around the base of the cone and twist it once or twice like this, which is enough to provide the purchase for the cone, as it were. then it gives you something to tuck into, whether it's the floral foam. In this instance, it's just going into either the compost or the moss. But again,
But that's really easy, isn't it?
it's an easy thing to do, but the thing about kind of accessorizing things like this, it's the little touches that make the difference. It's the sort of textural detail that people find interesting and intriguing. And these ones have just had a touch of spray paint.
Yeah.
So this, I use Oasis floral products. Other products are available. But this is a aerosol which is specifically designed for the florist trade, comes in myriad colours, dries almost instantly. And I've done these with white, and I've got just silver and gold here. But the beauty of this is that it just dries very quickly. It's designed for foliage or other absorbent materials.
Because sometimes you, like, if you spray things like cones,
Yes.
and you want them to be white for Christmas, then all the bits come off, don't they?
Yeah,
Lots of
I
little
don't know
bits
what
white, but
I don't
you
know what.
on this
No,
at
I
all.
don't know what the engineering of the paint is, if you like.
No,
but it's
it's
been
good.
research has been done that it's
Yeah.
fit for purpose. But the other advantage of using these, aerosol paints is that you can make boring things look more interesting, basically. I mean, even something like laurel or magnolia foliage or any evergreen,
Yeah.
you can spray it a colour and suddenly it looks much more interesting.
Yeah.
And dependent on the colour, it also will reflect light in a different way,
Yeah.
which makes it contribute more towards the
Yeah.
design as well. And that will pop up in a few of the
Yeah.
other things that we talk about as well later on. So I'm a big fan of these paints. And another tip, you know how we've all used, paints and things, and you go back to use them
Yeah.
a second time, and then you find the nozzle is blocked. Well, just before you finish spraying, turn it upside down so you're just getting propellant come out. That clears the nozzle and stops it being blocked. So it's just another one of those little tips, as it were, that's worth thinking about. I think it works for hair lacquer as well, but I don't use that.
I
And then
think that might be too late for me this
right.
Christmas. When I go back to last Christmas's gold paint.
Yeah, but it's worth, because these are about £8. They're not
Yeah.
inexpensive.
Yeah.
So you want to be able to use every last little bit of paint in the can. So you want to make sure that the nozzle is going to work. But just as I say, turn it upside down just as you're finishing. That blows out the last of the paint and keeps the nozzle open. So anyway, that's the
Nice.
planted box idea.
Nice.
Good.
Excellent.